They were thrown out of their own home at 73 years old, with nothing but 2 suitcases and a lifetime of betrayal. But when they stumbled into an abandoned lodge everyone said was cursed, what they found hidden in the walls would make the people who destroyed them wish they had never been born. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning Harold and Dorothy Peterson signed away their house, the sky over Pine Ridge was the kind of grey that settles into your bones. They sat at their own kitchen table, the one Harold had built 47 years ago when they first moved in, pens trembling in their calloused hands. Across from them sat their son Marcus and his wife Jennifer, both wearing expressions that tried too hard to look concerned. "It's just paperwork, Dad," Marcus said, sliding the documents closer. "Estate planning. Everyone does it. This way, when you're gone, there's no probate, no legal mess. We're protecting you." Dorothy glanced at Harold. They'd been married for 52 years. She could read every line on his weathered face like a book she'd memorized. Right now, that face showed doubt, but it also showed exhaustion. They were 73 years old. Their minds weren't as sharp as they used to be. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe this was what responsible people did. "You're sure this doesn't mean we lose the house?" Harold asked, his voice rough from decades of smoking a pipe he'd quit 10 years ago. "Of course not," Jennifer said, her smile too bright, too practiced. "You'll live here as long as you want. This just makes everything easier when the time comes." The time comes. Such a gentle way to say when you die. Dorothy signed first. Her hand shook as she wrote her name on the line. Harold watched her, then followed. The pen felt heavy. The signature felt final. Something in his gut twisted, but he pushed it down. This was his son, his only child, the boy he'd taught to ride a bike, to change a tire, to be a man. Surely he wouldn't lie to his own parents. Marcus collected the papers quickly, too quickly. He and Jennifer were out the door within 5 minutes, claiming they had another appointment. They didn't hug goodbye, didn't look back. 3 days later, a courier arrived with an envelope. Dorothy signed for it, her hands dusty from repotting the tomato plants on the back porch. Harold was in his workshop, a converted garage where he still fixed things for neighbors who couldn't afford real mechanics. She opened the envelope standing in the hallway, still wearing her gardening gloves. "Notice to vacate. You have 30 days to remove all personal belongings from the premises located at 427 Pinecrest Drive. Property sold to Cascade Development LLC effective immediately. Failure to comply will result in legal action." Dorothy's knees gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the letter fluttering from her fingers. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls of the house she'd lived in for nearly 5 decades seemed to close in around her. Harold found her there 20 minutes later, still sitting on the floor, staring at nothing. "Dorothy." He knelt beside her, joints cracking. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" She handed him the letter without speaking, watched his face change as he read it. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something darker, something that looked like the death of faith. "No," he whispered. "No, this is a mistake. Marcus wouldn't—" "Call him," Dorothy said, her voice hollow. "Call our son and ask him what he's done." Harold called 11 times. Marcus didn't answer. By the 5th call, it went straight to voicemail. By the 10th, Harold's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. Dorothy sat at the kitchen table, silent tears running down her face, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold the pieces together. That night, they barely slept. Harold lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to Dorothy cry quietly beside him. He reached for her hand in the darkness. She gripped it tight enough to hurt. 52 years, she whispered. "We raised him in this house." "I know. How could he do this to us?" Harold had no answer. The boy he'd known, the son he'd loved, wouldn't have. But the man who'd sat across from them 3 days ago with paperwork and lies, that man was a stranger. The next morning, they went to see a lawyer. Not a fancy one, just someone who did wills and divorces out of a strip mall office near the grocery store. He looked over the documents they'd signed, and his expression told them everything before he said a word. "You signed a deed transfer," he explained, his voice gentle but firm. "The house is no longer legally yours. You signed it over to Marcus Peterson, who then immediately sold it to this development company." "But he said it was just estate planning," Harold's voice cracked. "He said we'd still live here." The lawyer removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I'm sorry. I see this more than you'd think. Family members taking advantage. What your son did, it's legal, unethical, morally reprehensible, but legal. You signed the documents willingly." "Can we fight it?" Dorothy asked. "Can we sue him?" "You could try, but litigation takes time and money, a lot of both, and even if you won, which is unlikely given you signed voluntarily, you'd spend years in court. Do you have that kind of resources?" Harold and Dorothy looked at each other. Their savings account had $4,200. Their Social Security checks totaled $1,900 a month. They didn't have resources. They barely had hope. Over the next 4 weeks, they watched their life get packed into boxes. The movers came on day 28. Harold stood in his empty workshop, running his hand along the workbench he'd built in 1976. Every tool, every memory, loaded into a truck bound for a storage unit they could afford for maybe 3 months. Dorothy walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing. The kitchen where she'd cooked thousands of meals. The living room where they'd watched their son grow up. The bedroom where they'd loved each other through good years and hard ones. All of it empty now, all of it gone. Marcus never came, never called, never explained. It was Jennifer who showed up on the final day, clipboard in hand, to do a walk-through inspection like they were strangers who'd rented the place. She wouldn't meet Dorothy's eyes. "Did he send you to make sure we actually left?" Dorothy asked, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "Couldn't even face us himself?" Jennifer's jaw tightened. "Marcus made a business decision. You're taking this too personally. We're his parents. And he's securing his future. Your future too, actually. That money from the sale, it'll help pay for care when you need it." Harold stepped forward. He was a small man, barely 5'7", weathered from years of physical work, but in that moment he seemed bigger. "Get out of our house." "It's not your house anymore," Jennifer said. "Get out." She left. Harold and Dorothy stood in the empty living room, surrounded by echoes and ghosts. They had 2 suitcases, Harold's toolbox, and $1,700 cash they'd withdrawn from the bank. That was it. 52 years of marriage, of building a life, reduced to what could fit in the back of their 1998 Ford Ranger. They spent the first 2 nights in a Motel 6 on the edge of town, $68 a night. On the 3rd day, Harold bought a newspaper and started circling rental listings. But everything was too expensive. A 1-bedroom apartment was $1,200 a month, more than half their income. Mobile home spaces were full. The few rooms for rent were in neighborhoods Dorothy was afraid to walk through. By day 7, they were living in their truck. They parked in the Walmart lot at night. Dorothy curled up in the passenger seat. Harold reclined in the driver's seat, his back screaming in pain. They washed up in the bathroom at McDonald's, bought dollar menu items to justify using the space. The workers started to recognize them, their eyes full of pity that burned worse than the shame. Harold tried to stay strong. He'd survived Vietnam, raised a son, worked 43 years at the lumber mill before it closed. He'd faced hard things before. But this, losing everything to his own child, this broke something in him that had never been broken before. Dorothy held them together. She always had. While Harold retreated into silence, she made plans. Checked library computers for resources. Called churches asking about assistance. filled out forms for low-income housing that had wait lists 2 years long. She refused to give up, even when every door slammed in their face. On day 12 of living in their truck, Dorothy found it. She was at the library again, scrolling through classifieds on the ancient desktop computer, when she saw a listing that made her stop. Mountain property, structures on site, remote location, no trespassing, Blackwood Lodge Road, Pine Ridge. There was no price, no contact information, just a warning. But Dorothy knew Blackwood Lodge. Everyone in Pine Ridge did. It had been abandoned for over 20 years. The story went that a wealthy family had lived there in the 90s, some kind of business people from the city. One day they just disappeared, left everything behind. Police investigated but found nothing. The property fell into legal limbo, no heirs came forward, and eventually the town just forgot about it. Kids said it was haunted, that you could see lights in the windows sometimes, that anyone who went there never came back. Typical small-town legend. But Dorothy didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in survival. That night, she showed Harold the listing. They were parked behind a gas station, eating rotisserie chicken from the grocery store deli, trying to make it last 2 days. "Blackwood Lodge?" Harold looked up from his paper plate. "That old place up on the mountain?" "No one's been there in 20 years, Harold. No one owns it. What if we just stayed there, just for a while, until we figure something out?" "That's trespassing, Dorothy." "They took our house." Her voice was quiet but fierce. "Our own son threw us away like garbage. I've followed the rules my whole life. Where did it get us? Sleeping in a truck at 73 years old." Harold stared at her. In 52 years, he'd never heard her talk like this. Dorothy was the good one, the one who believed in doing things the right way. Seeing that faith broken in her eyes hurt more than anything Marcus had done. "What if someone finds us?" he asked. "Then we leave. But Harold, we can't live like this. Winter's coming. We'll freeze." He knew she was right. The nights were already getting cold. His back couldn't take many more nights in the truck. And his heart couldn't take watching his wife of 52 years wash her hair in a gas station sink. "Okay," he said. "We'll go look at it. Just look." They drove up Blackwood Lodge Road the next morning. The road was barely a road anymore, just 2 dirt tracks through overgrown forest. Branches scraped the sides of the truck. Harold drove slowly, carefully, the engine whining as they climbed higher into the mountains. After 3 miles, the trees opened up, and there it was. Blackwood Lodge rose from the wilderness like something from another time. It was massive, a Victorian-style mansion with 3 stories, a wraparound porch, and windows that stared down at them like eyes. The wood siding was weathered grey but intact. The roof sagged in places but hadn't collapsed. Ivy crawled up the walls, nature trying to reclaim what humans had abandoned. Dorothy got out of the truck slowly. The air was different up here, thinner, cleaner. The only sound was wind through pine trees and the distant call of a hawk. No traffic, no people, just silence and space. Harold joined her, and they stood together, staring up at the lodge. It looked like it was waiting for them. "It's bigger than I thought," Harold said. "It's beautiful," Dorothy whispered. The front door had a heavy padlock on it, rusted orange with age. Harold went back to the truck and got his toolbox. It took him 15 minutes to break the lock, his arthritic fingers struggling with the bolt cutters. When the lock finally gave way with a crack, they both jumped. Harold pushed the door open. It groaned on hinges that hadn't moved in decades. They stepped inside. The foyer was grand. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, crystals thick with dust but unbroken. A wide staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, the banister hand-carved wood. The floor was marble, cracked in places but still elegant. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and dead leaves that had blown in through broken windows. But underneath the decay, you could see what it had been. Wealth, elegance, a home built to last. They moved through the rooms slowly, reverently. The living room had furniture still arranged as if someone might walk in and sit down. Sheets covered most of it, but Harold pulled one back to reveal a leather sofa, cracked but solid. The kitchen was huge, with an old gas stove, cabinets full of dishes, and a walk-in pantry that still had canned goods on the shelves, swollen and rusted but there. "Harold," Dorothy called from down the hall, "come look at this." He found her in what must have been a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, still full of books. A massive oak desk sat in the center. On the mantel above a stone fireplace were photographs in silver frames, tarnished but intact. Dorothy picked one up and wiped the dust away. It showed a family. A man in his 40s, handsome in an expensive suit, a woman with kind eyes and perfectly styled hair, 2 children, a teenage boy and a younger girl. They stood in front of this very house, smiling like they owned the world. "They just left," Dorothy said softly. "Left everything." "Or something happened to them," Harold replied. He'd been thinking about the legends, about the family that disappeared. Standing here now, surrounded by their things, it felt less like a ghost story and more like a tragedy. They spent the rest of the day exploring. There were 6 bedrooms upstairs, each one still furnished. One clearly belonged to the teenage boy, posters of 90s bands on the walls, a desktop computer, ancient and dead, on the desk. Another was the girl's room, stuffed animals lined up on the bed, clothes still in the closet. The master bedroom took Dorothy's breath away. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, the mattress probably ruined but the frame solid mahogany. There was an ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub. The closet was full of expensive clothes, suits, and dresses that smelled of mothballs and time. "We can't stay here," Harold said, but his voice lacked conviction. This was someone's home. It was, Dorothy agreed. 20 years ago. Now it's abandoned. "Harold, look around. No one's been here in decades. No one's coming back." "What if the police find us? Then we leave. But until then, we have a roof. We have walls. We have a chance to figure out what comes next." They stood in that master bedroom, the afternoon light filtering through dirty windows, dust motes dancing in the air. Harold looked at his wife. She'd lost weight over the past 2 weeks. Her face was drawn, tired. She deserved better than sleeping in a truck. She deserved better than what their son had done to them. "Okay," he said, "we'll stay." That first night, they made camp in the master bedroom. Harold found an old air mattress in one of the closets, surprisingly still holding air. Dorothy cleaned with supplies they bought in town, scrubbing decades of dust from the bathroom until it was almost usable. The water still worked, rusty at first, but clearing after running for a few minutes. The electricity was dead, but Harold had flashlights. They ate cold canned soup for dinner, sitting on the floor of the bedroom like teenagers camping out. The house settled around them, old wood creaking, wind whistling through gaps in the windows. Every sound made them jump at first, but slowly, gradually, they began to relax. "Do you think Marcus even wonders where we are?" Dorothy asked quietly. Harold didn't answer right away. He thought about their son, about the boy who used to crawl into bed with them during thunderstorms, who cried when his goldfish died, who once told Harold he wanted to be just like him when he grew up. Where had that boy gone? When did he become someone who could destroy his own parents without a backward glance? "I don't know," Harold finally said. "I don't think I know him anymore." Dorothy reached over and took his hand. They sat in silence, listening to the wind, holding on to each other in the darkness of a stranger's abandoned house. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and after 2 weeks of having nothing, shelter felt like a miracle. The next morning, Harold woke early. Years of mill work had trained his body to rise with the sun. He left Dorothy sleeping and explored the house alone. In the daylight, he could see things he'd missed, the quality of the construction, the attention to detail. Whoever built this place had money and taste. He found a small room off the kitchen, probably meant for a maid or cook. It had a single bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the forest. This would be easier to heat than the master bedroom. He made a mental note to move their things down here before winter came. In the basement, he found the utilities. The water heater was ancient but functional. The electrical panel was shut off but looked intact. He traced the wires, checking connections. With some work, he might be able to get power running again. There was a backup generator too. Diesel, probably dead but maybe salvageable. He was studying the generator when he heard Dorothy calling him from upstairs. He found her in the kitchen, standing in front of the pantry. She'd been going through the canned goods, checking dates. Most were from the late 90s, 1997, 1998. Way past safe to eat, but then she'd found something else. "Harold, look at this." She pointed to a lower shelf he hadn't noticed before. On it were cases of military MREs, meals ready to eat, still sealed. The labels said they were good for 25 years. These would still be edible. "There's got to be 200 meals here," Harold said, kneeling down to check. Why would a family have this many? Maybe they were preppers, people who prepare for emergencies. Maybe. Harold pulled out one of the cases, examined it. Or maybe they knew they were in trouble. That thought hung in the air between them. This family, whoever they were, had stocked up like they were expecting disaster. And then they vanished. It didn't feel random anymore. It felt planned, desperate. They spent the morning organizing. Dorothy cleaned while Harold worked on making the house livable. He found tools in the garage, good ones, professional grade. Someone here had known their way around maintenance. He boarded up broken windows, tightened loose boards on the porch, checked the integrity of the structure. By afternoon, Harold felt confident the house was sound. The bones were good. It just needed care, attention, the kind of love he used to put into his own home before it was stolen from him. Dorothy made lunch from the MREs, beef stew that tasted better than it had any right to. They ate on the back porch, looking out over acres of overgrown land. In the distance, they could see mountains, no other houses, no people, complete isolation. "We need to be careful going into town," Dorothy said. "If people see us here, they'll ask questions." "We'll say we're house-sitting for a friend," Harold suggested, "or we just don't tell anyone anything." They fell into a routine over the next week. Mornings, Harold worked on the house. He got the water heater running properly, fixed the worst of the leaks, cleared debris from around the foundation. Afternoons, Dorothy cleaned and organized. She went through every room, cataloging what was there, imagining the lives lived in these spaces. Evenings, they sat together and read. The library was full of books, thousands of them. Harold read mysteries. Dorothy preferred historical fiction. They'd curl up in the wingback chairs by the fireplace, battery-powered lanterns giving them light, and for a few hours they could forget everything that had happened. Forget they were squatters. Forget they'd been betrayed. Forget they were 73 years old with nowhere else to go. But reality always crept back in, usually late at night when Dorothy couldn't sleep. Harold would wake to find her standing at the window, looking out into the darkness, her face drawn with worry. "What if someone comes?" she'd ask. "What if the owners show up?" "They won't," Harold would say, though he wasn't sure. "And if they do, we'll deal with it." 2 weeks after moving in, Harold discovered the locked office. He'd been exploring the second floor, checking rooms they hadn't really examined yet, when he found it. Heavy oak door, industrial deadbolt, completely out of place in the elegant house. He tried the door, locked solid. The deadbolt was serious, the kind you'd use on a safe room or vault. He examined it closely, noting the brand, the mechanism. This wasn't original to the house. Someone had installed it specifically. "Dorothy," he called, "come look at this." She came up the stairs, wiping dust from her hands. When she saw the door, her eyes widened. That's new. Newer than the house anyway. Someone wanted to keep people out of this room. Or keep something in. They stared at the door for a long moment. Every instinct told Harold to leave it alone. They were already trespassing. Breaking into a locked room felt like crossing another line. But curiosity gnawed at him. What was worth locking up this seriously? What had these people hidden? "We should open it," Dorothy said quietly. "Dorothy." "Harold, we're already here, already living in their house. What difference does one more room make?" He knew she was right. They'd already crossed so many lines, and honestly, he wanted to know too, wanted to understand who these people were, why they'd left, what secrets they'd kept. "It'll take time," he said. "That's a serious lock. We've got nothing but time." Harold started working on the lock that afternoon. He'd picked up some skills over the years, fixing things required understanding how they worked. Locks were just mechanisms, pressure points and pins. He worked carefully, methodically, using tools from the garage. Days passed. The lock resisted. Harold kept at it, spending hours each day working the mechanism, feeling for the give, the click that would mean progress. Dorothy brought him coffee, encouraged him, watched over his shoulder. On the fourth day, something shifted. A pin moved differently. Harold's heart raced. He adjusted his tools, applied pressure in a new direction. Another pin gave way, then another. "It's working," he breathed. Dorothy gripped his shoulder. They both held their breath. The final pin slid into place with a click that echoed through the hallway. Harold turned the mechanism. The deadbolt slid back. He looked at Dorothy. She nodded. Harold pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark, windowless. He shone his flashlight inside. The beams swept across filing cabinets, a desk, walls covered in corkboards with papers pinned everywhere. But it was clean, preserved, like someone had sealed it up to protect it. They stepped inside together. The air was stale, but not musty. Climate-controlled somehow, or just sealed tight enough to resist decay. Harold moved to the desk. Papers were spread across it, mid-work, like someone had stepped away for coffee and never returned. Dorothy went to the filing cabinets, started pulling open drawers. Inside were folders, hundreds of them, organized with labels, business documents, contracts, financial records. "Harold," she said, her voice strange, "these are dated 1998, 1999, right before they disappeared." Harold picked up a paper from the desk. It was a letter, handwritten, addressed to someone named Federal Prosecutor Michaels. His eyes scanned the lines. Words jumped out. Fraud, conspiracy, evidence, protection. "Oh God," he whispered. "What? What is it?" Harold's hands trembled as he read. This man, Richard Thornton, he was a whistleblower. He discovered financial fraud. He was going to testify, but he was threatened. His family was in danger. Dorothy moved to his side, reading over his shoulder. The letter was desperate, pleading. Thornton begging for witness protection, saying he had evidence of massive corruption, naming names, companies, amounts in the millions. They stood together in that sealed office, flashlight beams cutting through darkness, surrounded by the secrets of a man who'd tried to do the right thing and paid for it with everything. "They never made it," Dorothy said softly. "He tried to protect his family, and they never made it out." Harold thought of the photographs downstairs. The smiling family in their expensive clothes. The children with their whole lives ahead of them. Gone. Disappeared, trying to expose evil. "We need to keep looking," he said. "There's more here. I can feel it." They spent the rest of the day going through the office. Dorothy organized files while Harold read documents, piecing together the story. Richard Thornton had been an investment banker. He'd discovered his firm was running a massive Ponzi scheme, defrauding investors of hundreds of millions. When he threatened to go public, things got dark fast. Threatening phone calls, his car tampered with. His daughter followed home from school. He documented everything, kept meticulous records, built a case that could destroy powerful people. But before he could deliver it to authorities, his family vanished. The police investigated but found nothing. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, just gone. As the sun set and darkness filled the office, Harold noticed something. The wall behind the desk looked wrong. The paneling didn't quite match. He ran his hand along it, feeling for seams. There, a slight gap. He pressed, and something clicked. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. Dorothy gasped. Harold's flashlight beam swept into the opening, finding stairs leading down. "Harold, what is this?" "I don't know." He stepped closer to the opening, shining his light down. The stairs were steep, disappearing into blackness. "But I think we're about to find out." They stood at the threshold, looking down into unknown depths. Somewhere below was another secret, another piece of the puzzle. And despite every warning bell ringing in Harold's head, despite knowing they were in way over their heads, he knew they had to go down. "Together?" Dorothy asked, her voice small but steady. Harold took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. 52 years. They'd faced everything together. This would be no different. "Together," he agreed. They descended into the darkness, step by careful step, not knowing that what waited below would change everything, not knowing that the secret buried beneath this abandoned lodge was worth $275 million, not knowing that the powerful people who'd destroyed the Thornton family were still out there, still watching, still waiting for someone to find what had been hidden. All they knew was they'd lost everything to betrayal. And maybe, just maybe, in this house of ghosts and secrets, they'd find something worth fighting for. The stairs creaked under their weight. Harold counted them as they descended. 23 steps down into cool darkness. At the bottom, his flashlight found a wall. Concrete, reinforced, industrial. And set into that wall was a door, not wood, steel, with a combination lock that gleamed even in the dim light, maintained, waiting. Dorothy's breath caught. They'd found something. Something the Thorntons had hidden, had protected, had died trying to keep safe. Harold reached out and touched the cold metal. His hand shook. Behind this door was an answer, maybe not the one they'd been looking for, but an answer to something. "Should we?" Dorothy whispered. Harold thought about their son, about the house they'd lost, about sleeping in their truck and washing in gas stations, about being thrown away like trash by the person they'd loved most in the world. "Yes," he said, "whatever's in there, it's got to be better than what's behind us." He studied the lock, running his fingers over the dial. Somewhere in this house was the combination. Somewhere in Richard Thornton's desperate preparations was the key to this final secret. They just had to find it. And they would. Because Harold and Dorothy Peterson had nothing left to lose. And sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones with absolutely nothing left to lose. Harold stood in front of that steel door for a long time, his flashlight beam fixed on the combination dial. Behind him, Dorothy shifted her weight, the silence of the underground space pressing down on them like physical weight. "We need to go back up," Harold said finally. "Search the office. If Thornton hid something this valuable, he left a way to access it." They climbed the stairs back to the sealed office. The sun had set while they'd been exploring, and the house was dark except for their flashlights. Dorothy pulled out the battery-powered lantern they'd been using in the evenings, set it on the desk. The soft glow pushed back the shadows. "Where do we start?" she asked. Harold looked around the room. Filing cabinets, desk drawers, papers pinned to corkboards, boxes stacked in corners, a lifetime of secrets packed into one sealed room. "Methodically," he said. "We go through everything, dates, names, numbers, anything that might be a combination." They worked in silence, pulling files, scanning documents. Dorothy took the filing cabinets while Harold focused on the desk. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Harold's eyes burned from reading faded text by lantern light. His back ached from hunching over papers. In the desk's bottom drawer, wedged behind hanging files, Harold found a leather journal. The cover was worn, the binding cracked. He opened it carefully. Richard Thornton's handwriting filled the pages. This wasn't business records. This was personal, a diary of his last months. Harold read aloud so Dorothy could hear. January 3rd, 1999. They called again tonight. Same threat. Leave it alone or we'll hurt Sarah. We'll hurt the kids. I told them I had copies of everything, that if anything happened to us, it would all go public. I don't think they believed me. Dorothy stopped searching, listening. Harold continued. January 15th. Moved the primary documents to the secure location. Used the date Sarah and I got married as the combination. If something happens to me, if someone needs to find this, that date is the key to everything. Our wedding day, the day my real life began. Harold looked up at Dorothy. Her eyes were wide. His wedding date, she whispered. We need to find his wedding date. They tore through the office with new urgency. Dorothy found it in a photo album tucked in the bottom of a box. A wedding picture, Richard and Sarah Thornton, young and radiant, standing outside a church. On the back, written in faded ink, May 27th, 1974. The best day of my life. Harold committed the numbers to memory. 5, 27, 74. May 27th, 1974. They returned to the basement, descended those 23 stairs again. Harold's hands trembled as he reached for the combination dial. Dorothy stood close, her hand on his shoulder. 5, he said, turning the dial right. 27, left. 74, right again. He pulled the handle. Nothing happened. His heart sank. Try it differently, Dorothy said. Maybe month, day, year, or year, month, day. Harold tried every combination he could think of. Nothing worked. Frustration built in his chest. They were so close. The answer was right there. They just couldn't. Wait, Dorothy said. What if it's not just the numbers? What if we need to think like him? He was protecting his family. What would he use? Harold looked at the journal entry again. The day my real life began. He thought about his own wedding day to Dorothy. April 9th, 1972. If someone asked him for the most important numbers in his life, that's what he'd give. But they didn't know which format Thornton used. 6 digits? 8? He stared at the dial. It was a standard combination lock. 3 numbers. 3 numbers, he said. Most combination locks use 3 numbers. So not the full date, Dorothy reasoned. What 3 numbers from that date would matter most? Harold thought. 5/27/74. What if you reduced it? What if you took day and year? 27/74. But that was only 2 numbers. The year, Dorothy said suddenly. 1974. What if you use those 4 digits as individual numbers? 1, 9, 7, 4. But that's 4 numbers, not 3. Harold's mind raced. Then it hit him. What if you combine them? 19 is one number, 74 is another, and the month 5 is the third. So 19/5/74? Or 5/19/74, month first. Harold turned the dial. 5, right to 19, left to 74. He held his breath and pulled the handle. A deep click echoed through the concrete chamber. The handle moved. The door opened. Dorothy gasped. Harold stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. After a moment, he pulled the heavy door wider. Cool air rushed out, carrying the scent of paper and something else. Something sealed away. The vault beyond was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were lined with safety deposit boxes, the kind you'd see in a bank. In the center of the room sat a table, and on that table was a leather briefcase. Harold stepped inside. The room was climate-controlled. He could hear a soft hum of machinery. Thornton had built this to last. to preserve whatever was inside. He approached the briefcase slowly, reverently. Dorothy followed, her breathing quick and shallow. Harold's fingers touched the leather. It was soft, expensive, well-maintained despite decades of storage. He opened the clasps. They clicked loudly in the silence, lifted the lid. Inside were papers, certificates, bonds, stock portfolios, all neatly organized in clear plastic sleeves. Harold pulled out the first one. A bearer bond, issued in 1998. Face value, $500,000. "Oh my God," Dorothy breathed. Harold set it aside, pulled out another, a stock certificate. 10,000 shares of Microsoft, dated March 1999. He knew enough about stocks to know what Microsoft shares from '99 would be worth today. They pulled out document after document. Treasury notes, municipal bonds, corporate securities, each one worth hundreds of thousands, some worth millions. Dorothy started making a list, her hand shaking as she wrote. Harold kept pulling papers, kept counting, kept trying to comprehend what they were looking at. After 2 hours, they sat on the floor of the vault, surrounded by wealth they couldn't begin to process. Dorothy's list covered 3 pages. Her final calculations sat at the bottom, underlined twice. Total estimated value, $275 million. Harold read the number over and over. 275 million. It didn't seem real, couldn't be real. People like him and Dorothy didn't find this kind of money. This was lottery ticket fantasy. This was movie plot nonsense. But it was real, sitting in climate-controlled safety deposit boxes and a leather briefcase in a hidden vault under an abandoned house. Real enough to touch, real enough to count. They sat in stunned silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the house, a board creaked as the structure settled. Normal sounds, but nothing about this moment was normal. "Harold," Dorothy finally whispered, "what do we do?" He didn't answer, didn't know how to answer. His mind couldn't move past the number. $275 million. More money than he'd earn in 100 lifetimes. More money than existed in their entire town. Enough money to solve every problem they'd ever had. To buy a new house, to live comfortably, to never worry again, to make Marcus and Jennifer pay for what they'd done. But it wasn't theirs. "We should close this up," Harold said, his voice rough. "We need to think. We need to figure this out." Dorothy nodded. They carefully replaced everything in the briefcase, closed it, set it back on the table exactly as they'd found it. Harold pulled the vault door shut, heard it lock with that same deep click. They climbed back up to the office in silence. Dorothy extinguished the lantern. They made their way through the dark house to the small bedroom off the kitchen where they'd been sleeping. Neither of them spoke, both too overwhelmed to form words. Harold lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling. Beside him, Dorothy's breathing was uneven. He knew she wasn't sleeping either. $275 million, belonging to a dead man, hidden in a house no one owned, waiting for someone to claim it. And that someone, through pure accident and desperation, was them. The next morning felt surreal. Dorothy made coffee using their camp stove. Harold sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his face with calloused hands. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed too bright, too normal for the enormity of what they'd discovered. "We can't keep it," Dorothy said quietly. She set a mug of coffee in front of Harold. "You know we can't." "I know." He wrapped his hands around the mug, absorbing its warmth. "But it's not ours to give back either. Thornton's dead. His family's dead. Who do we give it to? The authorities? The government? Someone?" Harold thought about that. Thought about men in suits, asking questions they couldn't answer. Thought about lawyers and courts and legal battles that would eat them alive. Thought about Marcus somehow finding out, swooping in with claims and paperwork. "What if we just left it?" he suggested. "Sealed the door back up, pretended we never found it." "Could you do that?" Dorothy asked. "Could you sleep in this house knowing that's down there, knowing we're living on top of a fortune we can't touch?" He couldn't. She was right. The knowledge would poison everything. "We need to know more," Harold said. "About Thornton, about what happened to his family, about whether anyone's looking for this." That afternoon, they drove into town, parked at the library. Dorothy stayed in the truck, worried about being recognized, while Harold went inside. He found an empty computer terminal and started searching. Richard Thornton. Disappeared 1999. The results flooded in. Newspaper articles from 2 decades ago, missing persons reports, police investigation summaries. Harold read through them methodically, taking notes on a small pad of paper. Richard Thornton, age 42, investment banker with Sterling Securities. Reported missing along with wife Sarah, age 39, son David, age 16, and daughter Melissa, age 12. Family disappeared from their home in Pine Ridge on March 15, 1999. No signs of struggle, personal belongings left behind, vehicles still in garage. Extensive police investigation found no evidence of foul play, no bodies recovered, family declared legally dead after 7 years, estate entered probate, no heirs came forward, property eventually seized by county for unpaid taxes. Harold found more articles. These were from financial newspapers, buried in the business sections. They told a different story. Sterling Securities under investigation for fraud. Senior partner Richard Thornton believed to have discovered massive Ponzi scheme. Thornton missing before scheduled testimony. Case collapsed without witness. Investigation closed. No charges filed. The pieces connected. Thornton had evidence. Was going to testify. Disappeared before he could. Convenient for someone. Very convenient. Harold dug deeper. Found the names of people Thornton would have testified against. Powerful names. Wall Street executives, politicians, judges, people with resources to make problems disappear. He searched for those names next. Most were still alive, still working, still powerful. The scandal that Thornton died trying to expose had been buried with him. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Harold printed several articles, stuffed them in his jacket, and left. In the truck, he showed everything to Dorothy. They read together, her hand gripping his arm as the implications sank in. "They killed him," Dorothy whispered. "Killed his whole family to keep him quiet." "We don't know that for sure," Harold said. But he believed it. The evidence pointed one direction. Thornton threatened powerful people. Thornton disappeared. Those same powerful people walked away clean. "If they killed him for that evidence," Dorothy's voice shook, "what would they do if they knew we found it?" Harold had been thinking the same thing. $275 million was one kind of problem. Evidence of fraud that people had murdered to conceal was another kind entirely. "We need to be careful," he said. "We can't tell anyone we're at that house. Can't let anyone know what we found." Over the next week, they became paranoid. Every car that drove past on the distant road made them nervous. Every sound in the night brought Harold out of bed, rifle in hand. They started hiding the truck behind the garage, covering it with a tarp, stopped going to town together, varied their routines. Harold spent hours in the office going through Thornton's files. The man had been meticulous, documented everything. Names, dates, amounts, bank accounts. It was all there. A complete record of fraud totaling billions. Proof that could still destroy careers, topple companies, send people to prison. If anyone knew it existed, if anyone believed an old couple squatting in an abandoned house. Dorothy focused on practical matters. They needed food, supplies. She made lists, careful not to buy too much at once, didn't want to attract attention. Used cash for everything. Never used a credit card that could be traced. They were living like fugitives. which technically they were. Squatters in a dead man's house, sitting on a fortune they couldn't claim, holding evidence of crimes they couldn't report. 10 days after finding the vault, Harold was working on the backup generator in the basement when he heard it. A car engine. Close. Too close. He dropped his tools and ran upstairs. Found Dorothy already at the window, face pale. "Someone's here," she whispered. A black sedan sat in the driveway. Expensive. Out of place on the overgrown mountain road. As Harold watched, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, suit and tie, sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He looked at the house with an expression Harold couldn't read. "Get to the bedroom," Harold told Dorothy. "Lock the door. If anything happens, go out the back window and run." "Harold, do it, now," she went. Harold grabbed the rifle from the closet. It was old, a Winchester from his hunting days, but it was loaded and he knew how to use it. He positioned himself by the front window where he could see without being seen. The man walked around the house slowly, examining it, taking photos with his phone. He tried the front door, found it locked, moved to a window, peered inside. Harold's heart hammered. His finger rested on the trigger guard. Not aiming, not yet, but ready. The man completed his circuit of the house and returned to his car. He made a phone call. Harold couldn't hear the words, but could see his lips moving, nodding. The call lasted 3 minutes. Then the man got back in his car and drove away. Harold stayed at the window for another hour, making sure he didn't come back, making sure there weren't others. When he was finally convinced they were alone, he went to get Dorothy. She was sitting on the floor of the bedroom, hugging her knees. She looked up when he entered, tears streaking her face. "We have to leave," she said. "Harold, we have to go." "And go where? Back to living in the truck?" "We got no money, Dorothy. No place to go. At least here we got walls." "Walls won't stop bullets." Harold sat beside her, pulled her close. She was shaking. So was he, if he was honest. "Maybe it was nothing," he said, not believing it. "Real estate agent, developer, someone checking on the property." "You don't believe that?" "No, I don't." That night, neither of them slept. Harold sat in a chair by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the dark driveway. Dorothy dozed fitfully on the bed, waking at every sound. Around 3 in the morning, Harold heard it. The crunch of gravel. Footsteps. Slow, careful, someone trying to be quiet. He moved to the window silently, saw a shape in the darkness, moving toward the back of the house. Harold crept through the dark hallway, found the back door. Someone was working the lock. He could hear the metallic scraping. They were picking it. He raised the rifle, aimed at the door. His voice came out steady despite his racing heart. "I got a gun pointed at this door. You come through it. I will shoot you." The sound stopped. Silence. Then footsteps running. An engine starting. Tires on gravel. Harold stood there for 5 minutes, gun raised, waiting. Finally, he lowered it, went back to the bedroom. Dorothy was sitting up, eyes wide. "What happened?" "Someone tried to break in. I scared them off." "Oh, God. Harold, we have to call the police." "And tell them what? That we're squatting in an abandoned house and someone tried to break in? They'll arrest us." "Then what do we do?" Harold thought about the black sedan, the suited man taking photos, the nighttime break-in attempt. Someone knew they were here. Someone was watching. Whether it was about the house or the money or the evidence, it didn't matter. They were in danger either way. "We call the police," he said. "Report the break-in attempt, play dumb, say we're house-sitting for a friend, see what happens." The sheriff's deputy arrived 40 minutes later. Young guy, early 30s, name tag read Mitchell. He took their statement, wrote in his little notebook, looked around with a flashlight. "You say you're house-sitting?" Mitchell asked. "For who?" "Old friend," Harold said. "From the war. He's overseas. Asked us to keep an eye on the place. Mitchell looked skeptical. This place has been abandoned 20 years. He inherited it recent, Dorothy improvised. Fixing it up. We're just watching it while he arranges contractors. Mitchell walked around the property, shining his light into windows. Harold's pulse raced. If he looked too close, if he found the office, the vault. But Mitchell was young, bored. Probably didn't care about a break-in at an abandoned house. He came back to where Harold and Dorothy stood on the porch. Probably kids, he said. This place has a reputation. Folks say it's haunted. Teenagers come up here on dares. I'll increase patrols on this road. You see anyone suspicious, call it in. He handed Harold a card, started to leave, then stopped. Deputy? Harold asked. That friend of yours, Mitchell said. The one who owns the place. What's his name? Harold's mind raced. Bill Anderson. Bill Anderson. Mitchell wrote it down. And he's overseas where? Afghanistan. Contractor work. Mitchell nodded slowly. Okay. Well, you folks be careful up here. It's isolated. Long way from help if you need it. He got in his cruiser and drove away. Harold and Dorothy stood on the porch, watching his taillights disappear. He didn't believe us, Dorothy said. No, he didn't. They went inside, locked every door, wedged chairs under the handles. Harold kept the rifle close. The next morning, Harold was making coffee when he noticed something. The deputy's card. He pulled it out, looked at it closer. Deputy James Mitchell. And below that, a last name that made Harold's blood run cold. Mitchell was the name on one of Thornton's documents. One of the people listed as being paid off in the fraud scheme. Chief of Police Robert Mitchell, 1998. This deputy, this young cop who'd taken their statement with suspicious eyes, his last name was Mitchell. Harold showed Dorothy. She read it, face draining of color. It could be coincidence, she said, but her voice shook. Could be. Harold looked out the window. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky orange and gold. Beautiful, peaceful, hiding so much ugliness beneath. Or it could be they never stopped watching this place, never stopped waiting for someone to show up. What do we do? Harold thought about the vault. The evidence, the money. $275 million that could change their lives or end them. He thought about Richard Thornton, who'd tried to do the right thing, who died for it, whose family had been erased because he believed in justice. He thought about Marcus, their son, who'd stolen their home without a second thought, who'd proven that blood meant nothing when money was involved. And he thought about Dorothy, his wife of 52 years, who'd lost everything and still had the strength to keep going, who deserved better than running scared. We fight, Harold said. We take what Thornton started and we finish it. Dorothy looked at him, really looked at him, saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years, determination, purpose, fire. How? She asked. We find someone we can trust, someone bigger than the local cops, someone who can't be bought or scared off, and we give them everything. And the money? Harold thought about that. About what they could do with $275 million, the life they could buy, the revenge they could take. But he thought about Thornton, too. About a man who'd had everything and gave it up to do what was right. The money's evidence, Harold said. Thornton converted his assets before disappearing. Probably thought he'd need it to survive in hiding. It's part of his story, part of the proof. So we give it up? All of it? We give up what isn't ours. Harold took her hands. Dorothy, we been poor our whole lives. We got by. Maybe we don't need millions. Maybe we just need justice. For us, for Thornton, for everyone who got cheated. Tears ran down Dorothy's face, but she was smiling. When did you get so noble? When I got so tired of being a victim. They spent the rest of the day making copies. Harold found an old photocopier in the office that miraculously still worked. They copied every document, every piece of evidence, made 3 complete sets, stored them in different locations around the property. Insurance, if something happened to the originals, if someone came for them. The truth would survive. Dorothy searched online for lawyers, federal prosecutors, anyone with a reputation for taking on powerful people. She made a list. Names, contact information, specialties. They needed someone fearless, someone with resources, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Wall Street money or political connections. She found a name that kept appearing. Sarah Chen, federal prosecutor in the Eastern District, known for corruption cases, had taken down senators, CEOs, organized crime figures, young but ruthless, didn't lose. Her, Dorothy said, showing Harold the screen. She's the one. Harold read about Sarah Chen, saw her conviction rate, saw the cases she'd won, saw the enemies she'd made. Yeah, he agreed. She's the one. That night, they made the call, used a burner phone Harold had bought in town, got Chen's office, left a message with her assistant. Tell her we have evidence in the Richard Thornton case. Tell her we have everything he was going to testify about in 1999. Tell her we need protection. The assistant tried to ask questions. Harold hung up. Either Chen would call back or she wouldn't. Either this would work or it wouldn't. They were all in now. No going back. They waited, hours passing like days, checking the phone every few minutes, jumping at every sound. At 8:47 that night, the phone rang. Harold answered. Hello? This is Sarah Chen. You left a message about Richard Thornton. Harold's mouth went dry. This was it, the moment everything changed. My name is Harold Peterson. My wife and I, we found something. In Thornton's old house. Evidence. A lot of it. What kind of evidence? The kind people killed him for. The kind that's been buried 20 years. The kind that could still send people to prison. Silence on the other end. Then, where are you? Harold gave her the address, explained about the house, about squatting, about finding the office and the vault. He talked for 20 minutes straight, Dorothy beside him, her hand gripping his arm. When he finished, Chen was quiet for a long moment. You're telling me you found Thornton's evidence cache, the one we thought was destroyed? Yes, ma'am. And you're living in his house, illegally? Yes, ma'am. Another pause. Mr. Peterson, do you understand what you're sitting on? People went to a lot of trouble to make that evidence disappear. If they know you have it, they might already know, Harold interrupted. Someone's been watching the house. Someone tried to break in, and the deputy who responded, his last name was on Thornton's payoff list. Jesus Christ. Chen's voice changed, became urgent. Listen to me very carefully. Do not talk to anyone else. Do not touch anything else in that house. I'm sending a team. Federal agents I trust. They'll be there by morning. Lock your doors. Keep a weapon close. If anyone comes before my people arrive, you run. Understand? Yes, ma'am. One more thing. This evidence. You haven't taken anything? Haven't touched the money? Harold looked at Dorothy, thought about $275 million sitting in a vault below their feet, thought about how easy it would be to take just a little, to solve all their problems. No, ma'am, he said. We haven't touched anything. Good. Keep it that way. I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Peterson. Stay alive until then. She hung up. Harold set the phone down with shaking hands. What do we do now? Dorothy asked. We wait, Harold said, and we hope we're still breathing when the sun comes up. They sat together in the dark kitchen, rifle across Harold's lap, listening to the house settle around them. Somewhere in the mountains, people who'd killed to keep secrets were probably learning that those secrets had been found. And in a few hours, everything would change. For better or worse, Harold and Dorothy Peterson had stopped running. They'd stopped being victims. Now they were witnesses. They were warriors. They were two old people with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. And God help anyone who tried to stop them. The night stretched impossibly long. Harold sat in the straight-back chair by the kitchen window, rifle resting against his thigh, watching shadows move through the trees. Every rustle of leaves made his finger twitch toward the trigger. Every distant sound could be a car engine, footsteps, danger coming up the mountain. Dorothy dozed fitfully on the couch, waking every hour with a gasp. Each time Harold would reassure her with a gentle touch, a whispered, "I'm here," and she'd close her eyes again. But real sleep never came for either of them. Around 4 a.m, Harold saw headlights. His heart slammed against his ribs. He raised the rifle, positioned himself behind the wall, watched as not one but 3 black SUVs wound their way up the drive. "Dorothy," he called softly, "they're here." She was beside him in seconds, still wearing yesterday's clothes, hair uncombed, eyes alert with fear. They watched the vehicles park in a semicircle. Doors opened. Men and women emerged wearing dark windbreakers with yellow letters across the back. FBI. A woman stepped out of the lead vehicle. Asian, early 40s, hair pulled back severe, wearing a blazer despite the early hour. Even from a distance, she moved with authority. Harold lowered the rifle. "I think that's her." They went to the front door together. Harold opened it slowly. The woman approached the porch, hands visible, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understood armed, frightened people. "Mr. Peterson, I'm Sarah Chen. We spoke on the phone." Harold nodded. His voice came out rough from no sleep and too much fear. "You made good time." "I drove through the night." She looked past him into the house. "May we come in?" Harold stepped aside. Chen entered, followed by 6 agents. They fanned out professionally, checking rooms, securing the perimeter. One of them, a man in his 50s with grey at his temples, approached Harold with his hand extended. "Agent Marcus Webb, Organized Crime Division, been waiting 20 years for this." Harold shook his hand. The grip was firm, honest. "You knew Thornton?" "I was the lead investigator when he disappeared. Never believed the official story. Knew someone buried it." Webb looked around the house with an expression Harold couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or vindication. "Never thought I'd stand in this room again." Chen pulled out a tablet, stylus ready. "Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Peterson, I need you to walk me through everything. From the beginning, how you came to be here, what you found, everything." They sat at the kitchen table. Dorothy made coffee while Harold talked. He told her about Marcus, about signing away their house, about living in the truck, about finding this place and deciding to squat. Chen's face remained neutral, but her stylus never stopped moving. When Harold got to the part about discovering the locked office, Webb leaned forward. "Show me." They led the team upstairs. The office looked different in the grey dawn light filtering through dusty windows. Less ominous, more sad. Chen and Webb moved through it like archaeologists at a dig site, careful not to disturb anything, documenting everything. "This is incredible," Webb breathed, looking at the corkboards covered in evidence. "This is everything we needed, everything that disappeared." "There's more," Harold said. "The vault." He showed them the hidden panel, the stairs descending into darkness, the steel door with its combination lock. Webb stared at it like he was seeing a ghost. "He actually did it," Webb whispered. "Built himself a safe room. We theorized he might have, but we never found it." "The combination is his wedding date," Dorothy said. "May 27th, 1974. Chen tried it. The door opened with that same deep click Harold remembered. She stepped inside, and for a moment even her professional composure cracked. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God!" They spent the next 6 hours cataloging everything. Chen's team photographed every document, every certificate, every piece of evidence. They set up equipment, brought in specialists. The house transformed from abandoned relic to active crime scene. Harold and Dorothy sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee, watching federal agents swarm through rooms they'd been cleaning just days ago. It felt surreal. Violation and relief mixed together, Around noon, Chen came to find them. She looked exhausted but energized, like someone who'd been handed the case of their career. "I need to be straight with you," she said, sitting across from them. "What you found here, it's bigger than I imagined. We're talking about fraud totaling over $4 billion. Corruption reaching into federal courts, congressional offices, state governments. Dozens of people who thought they got away with it." "And the Thorntons?" Dorothy asked quietly. "What happened to them?" Chen's expression softened. "We may never know for sure, but based on what we're seeing here, Richard knew he was in danger. He tried to protect his family. My guess is witness protection was compromised. Someone on the inside was dirty. They never made it to safety." Harold thought about the photographs downstairs, the smiling children, the whole life ahead of them cut short. They were murdered. "Almost certainly. But without bodies, without witnesses, we can't prove it. What we can prove is the financial crimes, the conspiracy. And with this evidence, we can bring charges." "Against who?" Harold asked. Chen pulled out a list, started reading names. Harold recognized some from the news: a former senator, 2 sitting judges, the CEO of a major investment firm. People with power, with connections, with everything to lose. "These people," Chen continued, "they've been untouchable for 20 years. You just made them vulnerable." Dorothy's hand found Harold's under the table, squeezed tight. They'd done it. 2 old people living in a dead man's house had cracked open a case the government couldn't. "What happens to us now?" Harold asked. "You cooperate, fully. You'll need to give depositions, probably testify in court. We'll provide protection." "We don't have anywhere to go," Dorothy said. "This house, it's all we got." Chen looked around the kitchen, considered. "Technically, this property is in legal limbo. The county seized it for unpaid taxes after Thornton was declared dead. It's been tied up in bureaucratic hell ever since. No one's claimed it. No one's sold it." "So we're still trespassing," Harold said. "Or," Webb interjected, "you're material witnesses occupying a federal evidence site, which means we need you here to maintain chain of custody, to ensure the integrity of the investigation." Chen shot him a look. Webb shrugged. "I'm just saying, we need someone on site. Might as well be them." "We can't pay you," Chen said. "And you'll need to agree to oversight. Agents will be stationed here during the investigation. You'll have no privacy." Harold looked at Dorothy. After living in their truck, after having nothing, the idea of federal agents watching them seemed like a small price to pay for a roof over their heads. "We'll do it," Harold said. "Whatever you need." The next week blurred into organized chaos. Chen's team worked around the clock. Conference calls happened at all hours. Lawyers arrived in expensive cars, tried to intimidate, found themselves facing a prosecutor who didn't intimidate easily. Harold and Dorothy gave their depositions. Hours of questions about how they found the house, what they'd touched, what they'd seen. Dorothy's honesty impressed the stenographer so much she commented on it. Harold's detailed memory of dates and documents made Chen smile. "You two are the best witnesses I've ever had," she said. "No agenda, no axe to grind, just telling the truth." "We're too old to remember lies," Dorothy replied. On day 8, the story leaked. Harold was chopping wood behind the house when an agent came running. "Sir, you need to come inside. Now." Harold followed him to where Chen stood watching a television. A news anchor was speaking, a photo of Blackwood Lodge on the screen behind her. Breaking news in what prosecutors are calling the largest financial fraud case in decades. Sources say evidence discovered in an abandoned mansion in rural Pine Ridge could lead to indictments of multiple high-profile figures. The evidence, hidden for over 20 years, was reportedly found by an elderly couple who'd been living in the property. Dorothy appeared beside Harold. They watched in stunned silence as their story, or a version of it, played out on national television. Chen muted the TV. It was inevitable. This is too big to keep quiet. They didn't use our names, Harold said. Not yet, but they will. You need to be prepared for that. Prepared. How did you prepare for the world knowing your business, knowing you'd been thrown out by your son, knowing you'd been squatting in a dead man's house? The reporters came that afternoon. News vans blocked the narrow mountain road. Chen's agents set up a perimeter, kept them at a distance, but the cameras had long lenses. Harold saw himself on the evening news, grainy footage of him carrying firewood, looking old and tired and poor. The next morning his phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him. Dad? Marcus, his son, the voice he hadn't heard in months, the person who'd destroyed them. Harold's hand tightened on the phone. What do you want? I saw the news about the house, the money. Dad, I need to talk to you. Now you need to talk. When you were stealing our home, you didn't need to talk then. I made a mistake. I know that. I'm sorry. But Dad, if there's money, if you found something, we need to discuss it. I'm still your son. Legally, I might have a claim. Harold hung up. His hands shook with rage so pure it felt like fire in his veins. Dorothy came to him, wrapped her arms around him. He called, she asked. Wanted to know about the money. Thought he might have a claim. Harold laughed bitterly. Our own son. Threw us away. And now that we might have something, he wants back in. We don't have anything, Dorothy reminded him gently. It's evidence. It's not ours. I know, but he doesn't care about that. Never cared about anything but money. That afternoon, Marcus showed up. Harold saw him through the window. Their son, looking prosperous in his business casual clothes, his leased BMW parked behind the news vans. He was stopped at the perimeter by federal agents. Harold watched from the window as Marcus argued with them, gestured toward the house. Watched an agent speak into a radio. Watched Chen emerge from the house and approach Marcus. Even from a distance, Harold could see his son's body language change, the deflation, the anger. Chen pointed back down the mountain. Marcus argued more. Chen's posture never changed. Eventually, Marcus got back in his car and left. Chen returned to the house, found Harold still at the window. Your son? She asked. Harold nodded. He said he has legal rights to anything found on the property, that he's your heir and should be included in any decisions. What did you tell him? That this is a federal investigation, that everything in this house is evidence in a criminal case, that he has no legal standing whatsoever. She paused. He also mentioned that you're squatters, that we should remove you. Harold's stomach dropped. And I told him that you're cooperating witnesses under federal protection, that if he harasses you again, I'll charge him with witness intimidation. Chen smiled slightly. He left pretty quickly after that. Dorothy had come to stand beside Harold. She was crying quietly. He really came here for the money. Yes, ma'am, Chen said gently. I'm sorry. Don't be, Dorothy wiped her eyes. Better to know who he really is. Over the following days, the media frenzy intensified. Reporters dug into Harold and Dorothy's story, found public records of the house transfer, interviewed neighbors who remembered them, painted a picture of elderly parents betrayed by their son. Marcus tried to give interviews defending himself, said it was a misunderstanding, estate planning gone wrong. But the court of public opinion wasn't kind. Social media tore him apart. Someone found Jennifer's Facebook where she'd posted about their new boat the same week Harold and Dorothy were evicted. The outrage was swift and brutal. Harold tried not to take satisfaction in it, but he'd be lying if he said it didn't feel like justice. 3 weeks after Chen's team arrived, the first indictments came down. 4 people arrested in coordinated raids. More to come, Chen promised. The evidence was solid. Thornton's documentation was meticulous. This was going to trial, and Harold and Dorothy would have to testify. "I'm not good with public speaking," Dorothy worried. They were sitting on the back porch, watching sunset paint the mountains gold. Agents patrolled the perimeter. Their lives had become something from a movie, surreal and strange. "You just tell the truth," Harold said, "same as you always do." "What if I mess up? What if I say something wrong and it ruins the case?" Harold took her hand, looked at her face, so familiar after 52 years. Every line earned, every grey hair a story. "You found this place when we had nothing. You kept us going when I wanted to give up. You stood beside me through all of it. You won't mess up. You're the strongest person I know." She leaned against his shoulder. They watched the sun disappear behind the peaks. "I never thought our lives would matter like this," she said softly. "Never thought we'd do something important." "We've been important," Harold replied. "To each other. That always mattered." The trials began in the fall. Harold and Dorothy traveled to the city with a security detail, stayed in a hotel that made Dorothy nervous with its fancy lobby and rooms that cost more per night than they used to spend on groceries in a month. The courthouse was massive, imposing. Harold wore the one suit he owned, bought from Goodwill 30 years ago. Dorothy wore a dress she'd found at a church sale. They looked exactly like what they were, simple people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. The prosecution called Dorothy first. She walked to the witness stand with her head high, placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. And then she did. Simply. Honestly. No embellishment. She told about Marcus taking their house, about living in the truck, about finding Blackwood Lodge, about discovering the office and the vault, about being scared and broke and desperate and still choosing to do the right thing. The defense attorney tried to shake her, suggested she'd broken into the house looking to steal, implied she'd tampered with evidence. Dorothy just looked at him with those steady eyes. "Sir," she said, "I'm 73 years old. I don't have time for lies. We found that evidence by accident. We could have taken the money and run. Nobody would have known. But it wasn't ours. And Richard Thornton died trying to expose the truth. Least we could do was finish what he started." The jury was riveted. Several were crying. The defense attorney sat down. Harold testified next. He brought Thornton's journal. Read passages describing the threats, the fear, the desperate attempt to protect his family. His voice cracked when he read the last entry. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Please don't let them win. Please make sure the truth comes out. My family deserves justice. Everyone they hurt deserves justice." Harold looked up at the jury. "We found this man's last wish. We couldn't bring his family back, but we could honor what he died for." The courtroom was silent except for quiet crying. The defense tried to discredit them, brought up the trespassing, the fact they'd lived in the house for weeks before reporting it, suggested they'd had time to tamper with evidence, steal documents, fabricate parts of the story. Chen destroyed those arguments in redirect, showed that everything had been photographed, verified, authenticated, showed that Harold and Dorothy had never once asked for money or recognition, showed they'd risked their lives to do the right thing. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, came back with guilty verdicts on all counts. Harold and Dorothy sat in the back of the courtroom holding hands as the judge read the verdicts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. One by one, powerful people were held accountable for crimes they'd committed decades ago. When it was over, Chen found them in the hallway. "You did it," she said. "You got them." "Thornton got them," Harold replied. "We just delivered the mail." But that night, back at their hotel, Dorothy let herself cry. Relief and grief and exhaustion pouring out. Harold held her, his own tears silent, falling into her hair. They'd won. After everything, they'd actually won. The convictions made national headlines. The elderly couple who took down Wall Street, the greatest generation strikes back. Overnight heroes. Dorothy hated the attention. Harold tolerated it. They did a few interviews, carefully vetted by Chen, told their story to reporters who actually seemed to care. One journalist asked Harold if he had any message for his son. Harold thought for a long moment, then said simply, "I hope someday he understands that money can't buy back trust, and that the people you hurt have a way of haunting you longer than any ghost." Marcus never responded, never reached out again. Harold heard through a mutual acquaintance that he was being investigated too. The house sale to the developers had been shady, possible money laundering. His comfortable life was unraveling. Harold felt no satisfaction, just sadness for the man his son had become. 6 months after the trials ended, Chen called Harold with news. The courts made a decision about the money. The assets Thornton converted. They're frozen pending restitution to fraud victims, but there's a wrinkle. Harold's stomach tightened. What kind of wrinkle? Thornton's been legally dead for over 20 years. His estate was probated. No heirs claimed it, which means technically the assets are abandoned property. So the government takes it. Not exactly. There's a provision in whistleblower law. People who provide evidence leading to recovery of stolen assets can receive compensation, typically 10 to 30% of recovered funds. Harold did the math. 30% of 275 million. "We don't want it," he said immediately. "That's not why we did this." "I know, but legally you're entitled. And Harold, you and Dorothy, you've been living in limbo. You need security, stability. You've earned this." Harold thought about Dorothy, about her washing in gas station bathrooms, about sleeping in the truck, about never complaining, never giving up. "How much?" he asked. "The judge awarded 50 million to be paid out over time, with the stipulation that you continue to cooperate with ongoing investigations and victim restitution efforts." $50 million. Harold's mind couldn't process it, couldn't make it real. "The rest goes to the victims," Chen continued. "People who lost everything in Thornton's firm's fraud. It won't make them whole, but it's something." "Good," Harold said. "That's good." That night, he told Dorothy. She stared at him for a full minute. $50 million. Yes. "Harold, that's not real. That can't be real." "It's real." She sat down hard. Harold knelt beside her, took her hands. "We don't have to take it," he said. "We can refuse. We can—" "No," Dorothy interrupted. "No, we take it, not for us, but for what we can do with it." Harold understood immediately. This was their chance, not just to be comfortable, but to mean something. Over the next months, they worked with lawyers to establish a foundation. The Thornton Family Justice Foundation, they called it. Its mission? Helping elderly people who'd been exploited, defrauded, or abused by family members. Providing legal aid, housing assistance, financial protection. They bought Blackwood Lodge from the county, restored it completely, turned it into a resource center and shelter. Elderly people who'd lost their homes, who'd been thrown away like Harold and Dorothy had, could find safety there. Dorothy ran the day-to-day operations. Harold maintained the buildings, taught woodworking classes, listened to stories from people whose own children had betrayed them. The grand opening was covered by every news station. Hundreds of people attended, survivors of fraud, elderly people helped by the foundation, federal agents who'd worked the case. Chen gave a speech, talked about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, about courage coming in unexpected forms. But the moment that mattered most to Harold came later. A young woman approached him, her grandmother beside her. "Mr. Peterson, your foundation helped my grandmother. She was going to lose her house to a scam. Your lawyers stopped it, saved her home." The grandmother, tiny and frail, took Harold's hand. Her eyes were wet. "Thank you. My grandson tried to steal everything. Your people helped me fight back." Harold felt his throat close. This was why they'd fought, why they'd risked everything, not for money, for this, for meaning. That night, Harold and Dorothy sat on the restored porch of Blackwood Lodge, watching the sunset paint the mountains the same gold as that first evening they'd arrived here, scared, broken, desperate. "You think Thornton would approve?" Dorothy asked, "of what we did with his house?" Harold thought about the family and the photographs, about Richard's last journal entry, about a man who'd tried to protect the people he loved. "Yeah," Harold said, "I think he'd be proud." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to laughter from inside where residents gathered for community dinner, watching the sky darken, holding hands the way they had for 52 years. They'd been thrown away, discarded, left with nothing. And they'd turned that nothing into everything, not just for themselves, but for everyone who needed to know that it's never too late. That age doesn't determine value, that circumstances don't define character. Marcus never came back, never apologized. Harold heard he'd taken a plea deal on the money laundering charges, lost everything trying to hold on to things that never really mattered. Harold forgave him, eventually, not because Marcus deserved it, but because carrying hate was too heavy, and Harold had too much good in his life to weigh it down with bitterness. Some people inherit money. Harold and Dorothy inherited a dead man's mission, and they'd honored it in ways Thornton never could have imagined. The night ended. Stars emerged. Harold helped Dorothy to her feet. "Ready for bed?" he asked. "Ready for whatever comes next," she replied. They walked into their home, not stolen, not borrowed, truly theirs, earned through courage when they had nothing left but each other. And that, it turned out, had been enough all along. 1 year after the foundation opened, Harold stood in what used to be Richard Thornton's library. The bookshelves were still there, still filled with those thousands of books. But now they shared space with legal resources, victim advocacy guides, elder law textbooks. The desk where Thornton had written his desperate final words now belonged to a full-time attorney who handled intake cases. Harold ran his hand along the wood, feeling the grain smooth under decades of polish. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, he'd come here and imagine Thornton sitting in this very spot, writing those letters, documenting those crimes, knowing he was signing his family's death warrant, but doing it anyway because it was right. "You still talk to him?" Dorothy's voice came from the doorway. She held 2 mugs of coffee, steam curling in the morning light. Harold smiled. "Sometimes. Tell him what we're doing. Ask if he approves." "And does he?" "I like to think so." Dorothy handed him a mug, kissed his cheek. They'd been married 53 years now. Every line on her face was a map Harold had memorized, every grey hair a story they'd lived together. "We got a new intake this morning," she said. Woman named Patricia, 78. Her daughter-in-law convinced her to sign over power of attorney, cleaned out her bank accounts, left her with nothing. Harold's jaw tightened. A year of hearing these stories and they still made him angry. "Where is she now?" "Intake room. Scared to death. Thinks she's going to be a burden." "I'll talk to her." Harold found Patricia sitting in one of the comfortable chairs they'd set up in the old parlor. She was tiny, bird-boned, wearing clothes that had seen better decades. Her hands twisted a tissue into shreds. Harold sat across from her, kept his voice gentle. "Patricia, I'm Harold. My wife Dorothy said you might need some help." Patricia looked up. Her eyes were red from crying. "I don't have any money. I can't pay for a lawyer. I shouldn't have come. I'm sorry for wasting your time." "You're not wasting anything. This is what we're here for." "But I was so stupid. I trusted her. She said she'd take care of everything. Said I was getting too old to handle my own affairs." Patricia's voice broke. "And I believed her." Harold leaned forward. "Patricia, can I tell you something? My son stole my house, made me sign papers I didn't understand, threw me and my wife out when we'd given him everything. We ended up living in our truck." Patricia's eyes widened. "You?" "Me. Us. We were right where you are, feeling stupid, feeling ashamed, thinking we should have known better. What did you do? Harold gestured around the house. Eventually, this. But first, we survived. We found help. We learned that trusting the people you love isn't stupid. Betraying that trust is what's stupid. Patricia's shoulders shook. Harold handed her a fresh tissue. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Our attorney is going to review your case. If your daughter-in-law committed fraud, we'll fight it. You'll stay here in this house until you're back on your feet. No charge, no judgment, just help. I don't deserve— Stop! Harold's voice was firm but kind. Everyone deserves safety, everyone deserves justice, and everyone deserves to know they're not alone. Patricia cried then, really cried. Harold sat with her, the way countless people had sat with him and Dorothy over the years, bearing witness to pain, offering hope. By lunch, Patricia was settled into one of the upstairs bedrooms, the one that used to belong to Thornton's daughter. Dorothy had decorated it with cheerful curtains and a quilt she'd made herself. Patricia stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's yours for as long as you need it, Dorothy replied. Dinner's at 6, community meal. You'll meet the other residents, good people, been through hard things, but they're healing. Over the following weeks, Harold watched Patricia transform. The shame lifted, the fear receded. Their attorney built a case against the daughter-in-law. Turned out she'd done this before, to her own grandmother, a pattern of elder financial abuse. Patricia testified in court, her voice steady, her spine straight. She won. Got her money back, plus damages. But more than that, she got herself back. The day Patricia moved into her new apartment, paid for with her recovered funds, she hugged Harold and Dorothy so tight it hurt. You saved my life, she said. No, Dorothy replied. We just reminded you that your life was worth saving. Stories like Patricia's became common. The foundation helped 237 people that first year, prevented 83 evictions, recovered over $12 million stolen from elderly victims, prosecuted 47 cases of elder abuse. But the numbers didn't capture what really mattered. Didn't capture the woman who learned to smile again after her son had destroyed her credit. Didn't capture the man who finally pressed charges against the nephew who'd been stealing his Social Security checks. Didn't capture the quiet revolution happening in that house on the mountain. Harold and Dorothy became minor celebrities, not the way they'd feared with intrusive cameras and invasive questions, but as symbols, proof that age didn't mean powerless, that ordinary people could fight systems designed to crush them. They were invited to speak at conferences on elder law, at universities teaching social work, at government hearings on financial fraud protections. Dorothy hated public speaking, but did it anyway because the message mattered. I'm just a woman who got tired of being a victim, she'd say. And I learned that tired old ladies can be dangerous when they decide to fight back. Audiences loved her, her plain-spoken honesty, her refusal to play the hero. She'd tell their story simply, we had nothing, found something, did what was right, and somehow it turned into this. Harold would add the part about Thornton, about honoring a dead man's mission, about how legacy doesn't die if someone picks it up and carries it forward. Together, they became a force. 18 months after the foundation opened, Harold got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. Almost. Dad? Marcus. Again. Harold's hand tightened on the phone. He'd gotten these calls before, always asking for something. Money, usually, or help with his legal troubles. Harold always hung up. But something in Marcus's voice was different this time. Broken. Raw. What do you want, Marcus? I'm in a treatment program, court-ordered, for addiction. They're making me do family therapy, make amends. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve— His voice cracked. Dad, I'm so sorry for everything, for what I did. I was sick. I am sick. And I hurt you, hurt Mom, and I can't take it back." Harold sat down hard. Dorothy appeared beside him, concerned. He put the phone on speaker. "Where are you?" Harold asked. "Rehab center in the city. I've been here 3 months. Got another 3 to go. I lost everything, Dad. The house, the marriage. Jennifer left. My job, everything. And I deserve it. I know I deserve it." Dorothy's hand found Harold's. They sat in silence, processing. Their son, addicted, in treatment, broken. "Were you using when you took our house?" Harold asked quietly. "Pills, painkillers. Started after a back injury, spiraled. By the time you signed those papers, I was taking 60 milligrams of oxy a day, spending thousands, desperate." Marcus's breath hitched. "I told myself I was helping you, estate planning, but really I needed money, needed it so bad I destroyed my own parents." Harold felt something shift in his chest. Anger mixing with grief, mixing with something else. Understanding maybe, not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "You should have told us you were hurting," Dorothy said, her voice thick. "We would have helped." "I know. I was ashamed. Thought I could handle it. By the time I realized I couldn't, I'd already done too much damage." They talked for an hour. Marcus explained his treatment, the therapy, the steps he was taking, the amends he was trying to make. He'd seen the news about the foundation, about what they'd built. "You turned what I did into something good," Marcus said. "You could have just been bitter, could have used that money for revenge. But you helped people instead. People like me who hurt their families." "We didn't do it for you," Harold said honestly. "We did it for us, for Thornton, for everyone who needed to know they matter." "I know, but Dad, it still means something. Means you're better people than I ever deserved." After the call ended, Harold and Dorothy sat together in silence, processing, feeling. "Do you want to see him?" Dorothy asked. Harold thought about that, about the man who'd stolen their home, about the boy he'd taught to ride a bike, about addiction and sickness and the line between evil and illness. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me never wants to see him again. We don't have to decide now." They didn't. But over the following weeks, Marcus called regularly, checking in, sharing his progress, never asking for anything, just talking. Slowly, painfully, trying to rebuild something that might never be whole again. Dorothy started answering some of the calls. Harold listened but didn't speak much, watching, waiting, seeing if this change was real or just another manipulation. 3 months later, Marcus completed his program. Called to tell them. Harold could hear the pride mixed with fear in his voice. "I'm scared, Dad. Scared I'll use again. Scared I'll mess up. My sponsor says that's normal, but I wanted you to know I made it through." "What happens now?" Harold asked. "Sober living house, job at a warehouse, starting over. I'm 47 years old, and I'm starting from nothing." Harold understood that better than Marcus knew. Nothing isn't the worst place to start. Sometimes it's the only place where you can build something real. Another month passed. Then Marcus asked if he could visit. Not the foundation, not the house, just coffee, in town, neutral ground. Harold and Dorothy discussed it for days. Finally agreed. Set a date. Met him at a diner in the city where nobody knew them. Marcus looked different, thinner, older, his hair graying at the temples. He wore Walmart clothes and shoes that had been resold. He stood when they arrived, nervous, hands shaking slightly. "Mom? Dad?" Dorothy hugged him first. Harold saw her close her eyes, breathing in her son despite everything. When she released him, Marcus turned to Harold. Harold didn't hug him, shook his hand instead, firm but brief. "Marcus." They sat, ordered coffee. The silence stretched awkward and heavy. "I don't expect forgiveness," Marcus started. "My therapist says I need to accept that some things can't be fixed. But I wanted to see you, to say in person that I'm sorry. that I destroyed the people who loved me most, and that I'm trying to become someone different. Actions, Harold said. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. I know. I'm working, paying restitution to Jennifer's family for money I stole, doing community service, volunteering at a senior center, helping elderly people with basic home repairs. He laughed bitterly. Ironic, right? Helping the kind of people I victimized. Dorothy studied her son. Harold could see her trying to reconcile the boy she'd raised with the man across from them. Are you really sober? She asked. Truly? 6 months, 2 weeks, 4 days. I go to meetings every day, sometimes twice a day when it's hard. I have a sponsor. I'm working the steps. Mum, I'm trying. They talked for 2 hours. Marcus told them about his addiction, about hiding it, about the shame and the spiral and hitting bottom in a jail cell after his arrest for the money laundering, about finally admitting he needed help. Harold and Dorothy told him about the foundation, about the people they'd helped, about turning pain into purpose. Marcus cried when Dorothy showed him photos on her phone, the restored house, the residents, the lives changed. I took everything from you, Marcus said, and you built this. We didn't build it, Harold replied. Thornton built it. We just finished the job. When they parted, Marcus asked if he could call again. Harold said yes, said they'd take it slow, one day at a time, see where it led. In the truck driving home, Dorothy cried. Harold held her hand across the console. Do you think he's really changed? She asked. I think he's trying. Whether it sticks, whether he stays sober, whether he becomes someone we can trust again, time will tell. Do you want him back in our lives? Harold thought about that, about trust broken and heart scarred and 53 years of marriage that had survived everything, including their own child's betrayal. I want him healthy, Harold said finally. Whether that includes us or not, I want him to be okay, because he's still our son, even after everything. Dorothy nodded. Yeah, he is. They didn't see Marcus again for months, but he called every week, told them about his job, his sober living house, his meetings. Slowly, carefully, Harold started to believe it might be real. The foundation's second year brought expansion. They opened a second location in a neighboring county, hired more staff, partnered with legal aid societies across the state. The model worked. Other organizations started copying it. Harold and Dorothy found themselves advising new programs, sharing what they'd learned, helping other people build similar centers. Their story inspired a movement, but the work at Blackwood Lodge remained their focus. The residents, some stayed weeks, some stayed months. Each one carried their own story of betrayal. Family members who stole, caretakers who abused, systems that failed. Harold learned every name, every story, would sit on the porch with residents and listen, really listen, the way he wished someone had listened to him when he was at his lowest. One evening, a man named Robert joined him, 76, former engineer, brilliant mind. His grandson had taken power of attorney, sold his house, put him in a terrible nursing home. You ever get angry? Robert asked, looking out at the mountains. At the people who hurt you? Every day, Harold admitted. For a long time, that anger was all I had. How'd you get past it? Harold thought about that, about Marcus and Jennifer, about sleeping in the truck, about feeling thrown away. I didn't get past it, he said. I used it, channeled it into something that mattered. Anger's not bad if you point it at the right target. I pointed mine at injustice, at systems that let people hurt us, at changing things so maybe fewer people suffer. Robert nodded slowly. That's what this place is. Weaponized anger aimed at good. Harold smiled. Yeah, I guess it is. 2 years and 4 months after finding the vault, Sarah Chen called with news. The final defendant had been sentenced. The last of Thornton's documented criminals was going to prison. The case was closed. 23 people convicted, Chen said. Over $3 billion in restitution ordered. Federal laws changed. All because you two refused to walk away. Harold thought about the steel door in the basement, about opening it with shaking hands, about choosing to report it instead of taking the money and running. Thornton did the hard part, Harold said. We just turned the key. You did more than that. You gave voice to a dead man. You proved that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. You changed everything. After the call, Harold went to find Dorothy. She was in the garden behind the house, planting tomatoes with 3 residents. Her hands were dirty, her hair coming loose from its bun, her face bright with sun and purpose. He watched her for a moment. This woman who'd stood beside him through 53 years, who'd survived their son's betrayal, who'd chosen hope when despair would have been easier. Dorothy, he called. Chen says they're all convicted, every one of them. Dorothy stood, brushed dirt from her knees, walked over to Harold. The residents watched with knowing smiles. All of them? She asked. All of them. Thornton's evidence put them away. We finished what he started. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. She looked up at the house, at the windows where Thornton's children had looked out, at the walls that had held so many secrets. We did good, she whispered. Yeah, Harold agreed. We did real good. That night, they held a celebration at the house. Residents, staff, volunteers, attorneys who'd worked with them. Sarah Chen came, brought Agent Webb. They toasted Thornton's memory, talked about justice, about courage, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Harold stood to speak. He wasn't good at speeches, never had been, but he'd learned that sometimes the truth needed saying. 2 years ago, he began, me and Dorothy had nothing. Our son stole our house. We were sleeping in a truck, eating dollar menu, thinking our lives were over. The room was silent, listening. We came to this house desperate, just looking for shelter, but we found something bigger. We found a mission, a purpose, a reason to keep fighting. He looked at Dorothy. And we found out that it's never too late. That age doesn't make you worthless, that the systems that try to crush us can be fought. He raised his glass. To Richard Thornton, to his family, to justice delayed but finally delivered, and to everyone in this room who refused to stay a victim. The room erupted in cheers. Harold sat down, embarrassed by the attention. Dorothy kissed his cheek. Good speech, she murmured. I meant it. I know you did. 3 years after moving into Blackwood Lodge on a crisp October morning, Harold and Dorothy received an unexpected visitor, a woman in her 60s, well-dressed, carrying a briefcase and a photograph. Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, my name is Margaret Hayes. I'm Richard Thornton's cousin. I only recently learned what you'd done, with his house, his evidence. I had to come thank you. They invited her in. Margaret looked around the transformed house with tears in her eyes. Richard would love this, she said, turning his tragedy into hope. It's exactly what he would have wanted. She showed them the photograph. Richard's family at a beach, the kids building sandcastles, Sarah laughing, everyone tan and happy and alive. This was 2 months before they disappeared, Margaret said. Last time I saw them, Richard called me the night before, said he'd discovered something terrible, said he had to do the right thing even though it scared him. I told him to be careful. He said some things were worth the risk. Harold thought about that, about risks worth taking, about doing right even when it cost everything. Did you ever learn what happened to them? Dorothy asked gently. Margaret shook her head. No bodies were ever found. I like to think maybe they made it out. Maybe they're somewhere safe, living under new names. But in my heart I know. They died because Richard wouldn't stay quiet. She opened her briefcase, pulled out documents. I've been working with Attorney Chen. I want to donate to your foundation. It's what Richard would have wanted. His life insurance finally paid out after he was declared dead. $250,000. It should go to continuing his work. Harold started to protest, but Margaret held up her hand. Please, let me do this. Let me honor my cousin's memory. You've already done so much. Let me help. They accepted, used the money to expand the legal aid program, helped even more people. Margaret became a regular volunteer, came once a month to work in the garden, talk to residents, keep her cousin's memory alive. Marcus's recovery continued. Slowly, he celebrated 1 year sober, then 18 months. Harold and Dorothy started seeing him every few months. Coffee, lunch, brief visits, rebuilding trust like reconstructing a shattered vase, painstaking, imperfect, but real. Marcus volunteered to do repairs at the foundation. Harold supervised at first, not quite trusting, but Marcus showed up on time, worked hard, didn't ask for money or special treatment, just did the work. One Saturday, they were replacing rotted boards on the back porch, working side by side like they hadn't since Marcus was a boy. The silence between them was comfortable for the first time in years. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "I know I can't undo what I did, can't give you back the years I stole, but I want you to know I'm grateful for this, for the chance to be here, even just this." Harold hammered in a nail before responding. "You're here because your mother has a bigger heart than me. She wanted to give you another chance." "And you didn't?" "I wanted to stay angry. Anger felt safer than hope. But your mum, she reminded me that we built this whole place on second chances. Seemed hypocritical to deny you one." They worked in silence for a while longer. Then Marcus asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive me? Really forgive me?" Harold set down his hammer, looked at his son, saw the boy who'd once followed him around this same porch asking endless questions, saw the man who'd betrayed them, saw the addict trying to recover. All of it true, all of it Marcus. "I'm trying," Harold said honestly. "Some days are easier than others, but I'm trying. That's more than I deserve." "Probably. But we don't always get what we deserve. Sometimes we get grace instead. You're getting grace because your mother loves you, and because despite everything, I still want you to be okay." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Dad. I know I showed it wrong. Know I hurt you, but I do love you." Harold nodded. Couldn't quite say it back yet, but someday, maybe someday. 4 years after finding the vault, Blackwood Lodge was featured in a major magazine. "The House That Changed Elder Justice," the headline read. Photos showed the restored Victorian mansion, the residents in the garden, Harold and Dorothy on the porch where they spent most evenings. The article detailed their story, the betrayal, the discovery, the choice to do right. It talked about the foundation's impact. 743 people helped. Over $47 million recovered from elder abuse. 16 state laws changed, a movement born from 2 old people refusing to stay victims. Harold kept a copy of the magazine, showed it to Thornton's photo on the memorial wall they'd created in the library. "We kept our promise," he told the smiling face in the picture. "Your story got told. Your work mattered. You didn't die for nothing." Sometimes late at night, Harold would go down to the vault. It was empty now, the evidence long ago transferred to federal custody. But he'd stand in that small room where $275 million had waited for someone to find it. He'd think about that moment when the door opened, when they saw what was inside, when they made the choice that changed everything. They could have taken the money, could have disappeared, could have lived comfortably on just a fraction of it. No one would have known, but they would have known. And Harold had learned something in his 77 years. You have to live with yourself longer than you live with anyone else. And living with himself as a thief would have been harder than living poor but honest. 5 years after moving into Blackwood Lodge, Harold woke to find Dorothy sitting at the window, watching sunrise paint the mountains gold. "You okay?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. "Just thinking," she said, "about how far we've come. 5 years ago, we were sleeping in a truck. Now we're helping hundreds of people, changing laws, making a difference." Harold joined her at the window, wrapped his arms around her from behind. They watched the sun rise together. "You ever miss the old house?" he asked. "The one we lost?" Dorothy thought about that. Sometimes. But Harold, that house was just walls. This, what we built here, this is home. This matters. She turned in his arms, looked up at his weathered face. "We're 77 years old. We should be retired, sitting on some beach somewhere." "You want to be on a beach?" "God, no. I want to be here, doing this. As long as my body holds up, I want to keep fighting." Harold kissed her forehead. "Then we keep fighting." They did. For years, the foundation grew, helped thousands, changed systems, gave voice to the voiceless. Harold and Dorothy became the faces of elder justice, proof that it's never too late, that being old doesn't mean being powerless. Marcus stayed sober. 3 years. 4. 5. Slowly, painfully, he rebuilt his relationship with his parents. It would never be what it was. Trust once shattered never heals completely smooth. But it was something, and something was more than nothing. On their 57th anniversary, Harold and Dorothy renewed their vows. Simple ceremony in the garden at Blackwood Lodge. Residents attended, staff, volunteers, Sarah Chen, Agent Webb, Margaret Hayes. Marcus was there too, sober 5 years, working as a substance abuse counselor, helping other people avoid the mistakes he'd made. He walked his mother down the aisle. Dorothy had insisted. Harold watched her approach, this woman who'd stood beside him through everything: poverty, betrayal, fear, triumph. 57 years, every single one a gift. The minister asked if Harold took Dorothy to be his wife, to love in sickness and health, good times and bad. "I do," Harold said. "I always have. I always will." Dorothy cried. So did half the guests. They exchanged simple bands to replace the ones lost years ago when they'd sold them for gas money. At the reception, toasts were made, stories told. Margaret talked about Richard Thornton, about how proud he'd be. Chen talked about justice and courage. Webb talked about never giving up on truth. But the toast that mattered most came from a resident named Alice, 81 years old, brilliant quilter, recovering from her daughter's financial abuse. "To Harold and Dorothy," Alice said, raising her glass. "Who taught us that being thrown away isn't the end of our story? It's just the beginning of a new chapter, and that chapter can be the best one yet." The room erupted in agreement. Harold and Dorothy looked around at faces they'd helped, lives they'd changed, hope they'd restored. This was what mattered. Not the money in the vault, not the headlines or the awards or the recognition. This. People healing. People fighting back. People refusing to disappear just because the world expected them to. As the party wound down and guests departed, Harold and Dorothy sat on the porch. The same porch where they'd spent that first terrified night, where they'd made the choice to stay, where they'd decided to fight. "You tired?" Harold asked. "Exhausted," Dorothy admitted, "but good tired, the kind that means you did something worth doing." Harold took her hand. "We did, didn't we? Made something matter." "We did. Richard Thornton tried to expose corruption, died for it. But we finished his work, made sure his death meant something." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to night sounds, crickets, wind in the pines, the soft murmur of residents inside sharing their own stories. "I forgave Marcus," Dorothy said quietly. "Really forgave him. Not just words. I let go of the anger." When? Watching him walk me down the aisle, seeing how hard he's worked to change, realizing that holding on to hate was hurting me more than him. She looked at Harold. "You don't have to forgive him. I know it's harder for you." Harold thought about his son, about the man who'd stolen their house, about the addict fighting to stay sober, about the volunteer who showed up every week to help repair the building his parents had turned into hope. "I'm getting there," Harold said. "Not all the way, but closer. Maybe that's enough." Maybe it is. Years passed. The foundation thrived. Harold's knees got worse, Dorothy's hands developed arthritis, but they kept working, kept fighting, kept showing up. They trained younger people to take over, hired an executive director, built a board, ensured the work would continue after they were gone. Because that was the point, wasn't it? Legacy, making sure the good you did outlived you. Harold thought about that often, about what he'd leave behind. Once he thought it would just be Marcus, one son who'd remember him. Now it was hundreds of people whose lives had changed, thousands who'd been helped. Laws that protected the vulnerable, a movement that empowered the elderly. Not bad for a guy who used to fix cars at a lumber mill. On Harold's 80th birthday, the foundation threw him a party. He hated being the center of attention, but Dorothy insisted. "You've earned celebration," she said. "Let people honor you." The library was packed, residents past and present, people they'd helped, attorneys they'd worked with, reporters who'd told their story. Even the governor sent a video message thanking Harold for his service to elder justice. Marcus gave a speech, talked about his father's integrity, about learning what real strength looked like, about how Harold had every reason to give up and never did. "My dad taught me that it's never too late to do the right thing," Marcus said. "Even when I did everything wrong, he showed me that change was possible, redemption was possible, that you could turn your worst moments into your best work." He looked at Harold. "I'm proud to be your son, even though I didn't deserve that honor for a long time." Harold's throat tightened. He nodded at Marcus. Couldn't speak, too full of emotion. When it was Harold's turn to respond, he kept it simple. "I'm just a guy who got lucky. Lucky to have Dorothy. Lucky to find this house. Lucky to finish what Richard Thornton started. Any good that's come from it, that's not me, that's all of us, together. Refusing to accept that old means powerless." The room stood and applauded. Harold sat down quickly, embarrassed, seeking Dorothy's hand. She squeezed tight. That night, after everyone left, Harold and Dorothy walked through the quiet house, room by room, remembering. The library where they'd found Thornton's journal. The office where they'd discovered the truth. The stairs leading down to the vault where everything changed. "We've had a good run," Harold said. "We're not done yet," Dorothy replied. "Still got fight left." "I know, but someday, when we're gone, this place will keep going. The work will continue. That's what matters." They ended in the master bedroom, their bedroom now, restored and comfortable, a far cry from sleeping in the truck. Harold held Dorothy close, breathed in her familiar scent, thanked God or fate or luck for every day he'd gotten with her. "I love you," he whispered. 57 years and I love you more every day." "I love you too," Dorothy replied. "You're still the best thing that ever happened to me." They fell asleep, wrapped in each other. Two old people who'd been thrown away and refused to stay discarded, who'd found purpose in pain, who'd turned betrayal into justice. The next morning, Harold woke early as always, made coffee, sat on the porch watching the sun rise, thinking about Richard Thornton, about a man who'd died trying to do right. "We kept the faith," Harold said to the mountains, to the sky, to wherever Thornton's spirit might be. "You tried to expose the truth. We made sure it came out. Your family's gone, but they're not forgotten. This house is their memorial. Everyone we help, that's your legacy continuing." Dorothy joined him, handed him a fresh cup of coffee, sat in her usual chair. "Talking to Richard again?" she asked. "Yeah, telling him we're still at it." "Think he hears you?" "I like to believe so." They sat together, 77 and 80 years old, more in love than ever, surrounded by purpose and meaning and hope. Their son was sober, their foundation was thriving, their lives mattered in ways they never could have imagined. They'd been betrayed, discarded, left with nothing. And they'd turned that nothing into everything. Not just for themselves, but for everyone who needed to know that it's never too late. That age is just a number. That courage doesn't have an expiration date. Harold looked at Dorothy, saw every year in her face, every struggle, every triumph, every moment they'd survived together. "We did good," he said. "We did," she agreed. "And we're not done yet." They weren't. For years more they kept fighting, kept helping, kept showing up, until their bodies finally gave out, until they'd given everything they had. But the foundation continued. The work spread, the laws they'd helped pass protected millions. The movement they'd started empowered countless elderly people to fight back against abuse. And in Blackwood Lodge, in the library where Richard Thornton had written his final desperate words, a new plaque hung beside his photo. To Harold and Dorothy Peterson, who proved that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, who turned tragedy into triumph, who showed us all that it's never too late to matter. You finished what Richard started. You honored his legacy. You changed the world. Because sometimes the strongest heroes aren't the loudest. They're the ones with weathered hands and quiet determination. The ones who've been knocked down and get back up. The ones who choose justice over revenge, hope over bitterness, love over hate. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to speak the truth. As the morning sun warmed the stone walls of the old Thornton mansion, Harold and Dorothy Peterson didn't reach for their past with regret. They reached for their future with purpose. They knew now the fight they'd stumbled into wasn't just about them. It belonged to every working person who'd been told to stay quiet, every elderly soul who'd been called a burden, every voice that had been silenced by money and power. The mechanic and the homemaker who once had nothing had become the engines behind something greater. Because for Harold and Dorothy, and for everyone they fought for, justice wasn't just a word in a courtroom, it was a promise kept, a life reclaimed, a truth that refused to stay buried. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful true stories that will move you. Click now to keep the inspiration going and hit subscribe if you believe that doing the right thing always matters, no matter the cost.